Hello everyone, I'm Chris O'Hara back for another guitar tutorial. And today is kind of a Q&A. This is these questions were brought to me by a good friend of mine and former student who's traveling all over the place. I think he's going to be in Belize. Maybe he's probably there right now. I'm so jealous. So this tutorial is going to cover a lot of concepts of a little bit more advanced stuff related to jazz. So I want to just kind of put a disclosure down that if you're, it's more of an intermediate to advanced tutorial. So if you're kind of new to theory and that stuff, it may be a little bit over your head. So just kind of FYI in that. But if you understand chords, you understand scales, and a little bit of those relationships, this could be a good kind of, I don't know, kind of an overview of what's out there. I mean, I do get into some specific things, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start kind of where what I think you should start with as far as like learning jazz and some of the more advanced kind of concepts on the guitar. Basically like things like arpeggios, working on tunes, transposing the tunes, and how to approach arpeggios and how to approach that kind of practice. But it's definitely a jazz-based type genre that I'm going to be working with. But let me give you an idea of what I'm going to be talking about in this kind of Q&A tutorial. I'm going to talk about triad pairs, how to practice them, and kind of a couple uses of them. I'm going to talk about practicing chromatic chord movements. So basically playing, let's say, for instance, a major chord and working them either down the neck or actually working them in position, and the benefits of either one of those. Digital patterns. This is something that John Coltrane used a lot. I'm going to talk about kind of which ones to use, and also are they important to work on. Pentatonics. I'm going to cover a few things on pentatonics. There's definitely some more modern approach or modern usage of pentatonics, and a couple of different situations that you can use them. Voice leading. I'm going to talk about voice leading. I'm also going to talk about a book written by Ted Greene. He's got a few books out, actually, and they're all really good books. They probably need a little bit of an update, but unfortunately, he passed away. I don't know how long ago, but incredible guitar player and great books. I highly recommend the Ted Greene series books, from his chord chemistry to his modern chord progressions to his single note volumes. They're all really, really, really good. I always go back to them and learn something new from them. I'm going to talk about arpeggios, some of the main arpeggios that you probably should work on when you're, again, this is based off a jazz approach. Tritone substitutions. Again, some of this is going to be assuming that you know a little bit about this information. So if you've never heard of a tritone sub, it may be a little bit over your head. I'm going to be talking about scales and the difference between 3 notes per string versus kind of a block position or in position playing scales, which one to practice. And I'll talk a little bit about how that relates to the melodic minor scale. Also, I'm going to talk about some chords that have the same shape. For instance, a B flat 6 versus a G minor 7. Are they different? We'll find out. And also the difference between kind of learning new material. I should say, I don't know the difference, but what to focus on. Learning new material versus building upon what you already know. But let me start now by kind of talking about kind of a step one, I guess, approach to learning jazz. And I'm by far an expert at this. There's plenty of great videos on YouTube and guitar players out there that know way more about jazz than I do. I've studied quite a bit of it, but I'm I'm still learning a lot about this music, and I don't really consider myself a quote unquote jazz player, but hopefully some of the things that I've learned I can pass on to you, especially someone who's starting out with this. The first thing I think that's important with learning jazz is, and this is just, I'm just passing information that I've been told from teachers that I've studied with, which is, I think it may go without saying, but learning jazz tunes. And I think that that is a kind of essential first step. And versus kind of learning all this technique and scales and chords and stuff like that, I think if I had to do it all over again, I would spend majority of my time learning the jazz tunes, learning how to play the melody and learning how to play the chords, with a little bit of emphasis on improvising through those chord changes. But learning the tunes and the chords, it'll really help you learn to improvise. And it's easy to get wrapped up in all the theory and all the technical things that you want to be able to play and be able to play like your favorite artist. But to be honest with you, like I said, if I had to do it all over again, it would be tunes, learning as many tunes as you can, and even learning them in different keys. Now, one way to kind of simplify things, and this could be a good kind of approach that you can take, which is I would pick a tune and maybe learn it in like one or two different keys. Just keep it simple. Now, I know there's some jazz educators out there that really push you learning a tune in all 12 keys, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. In fact, you can learn quite a bit from learning a jazz tune in all 12 keys. But that takes a lot of time and effort to do that, and most of us just don't have that time. So you have to really kind of simplify things and kind of take off bite-sized chunks of all this information. So step one is to learn the tune in the key. Step two would be to maybe transpose that into one other key, both the melody and also the chords. One way that can help you do that is to learn the melody in relationship to that key center. An example of that would be if I take the tune There Is No Greater Love, which the melody goes, whoops. That's the first few notes of that tune. Well, the very first note is an A. The key is in B flat. Very first note is A, which is the seventh of that key, B flat. 7, and it goes up to the 1, 2, back to 1, 7, 6. And if you can understand the melody in that terms, it'll be easier to transpose that into other keys. So if you know 7, 1, 2, 1 is the first few notes, you just find whatever key you're in and play that. You can be able to hopefully easily find that melody in the new key. Same thing with the chords. If you know the chords are going 1, 2, flat 7 to 6, then you'll be able to transpose those chords into the new key. The numbering system is really is what allows you to do that. That's why I'm a big fan of it. Not everybody has perfect pitch, and this kind of numbering system is really good for people like myself who don't have perfect pitch and also want to kind of a relatively simplistic way of kind of moving these things around. So the next thing, let me get a drink here. The next thing to think about after taking the tune and transposing it in maybe a couple different keys, I think it's important to record yourself playing the tune. First starting with the chords, and then playing that back and playing the melody over it, and maybe try to do a little improvisation over it. And each time you do that, it's important. It's a good practice routine, because that when you go into this record mode, that red light's on, and it puts you in a completely different frame of mind, and it forces you to be more accountable for everything. Because sometimes we just kind of play through things and we think we got it, but we really don't. So when you have to record it and play it back and then play on top of that again, it holds you accountable to what you've recorded. Plus, you get an idea of where you're at. You can hear what you need to improve on, what you need to change, and things like that. An example for something that I'm working on, I can play through a tune at a very simple or relatively easy tempo, but maybe my rhythm is very predictable and I want to change that. Sometimes I hear that, so I need to kind of work with changing my rhythm with the chords. Maybe there's different chord voicings I want to focus on and improving. And then the other thing is being able to play along with yourself. And when you hear it back, does it swing? Does it feel right? Does all the rhythm sound good? One thing that I recommend, that something that's been taught to me, which is when you're recording these chords for jazz, have a metronome clicking in the background. If you're using like a microphone in the room, you can, if you're using GarageBand or something like that, have something clicking in the background, so you have just the chords and the click, so you can hear that relationship between the rhythms that you're playing and that click. It'll kind of help things lock in, but it'll keep you accountable for keeping that rhythm and the tempo steady. So after you, again, record, and I would record it for about 5 or 10 minutes if you can, and that'll give you a good kind of rhythm track. And this is something you can do every day. Don't reuse it, re-record it. That test, because you have to do that in a real context, real kind of life context. You have to be able to play through that every time. And so every time you practice, if you can, try to do that. I need to do more of that. I don't do that as often as I used to. The next thing I would recommend is to play the arpeggios and inversion of those arpeggios for that specific tune. So you could pick a tune for like a week or two, or even longer than that, depending on where you're at. But then go through that tune and play all the different inversion of arpeggios. And let me give you an example. So the tune, There Is No Greater Love, starts off on a B flat chord, then it goes to an E flat 7 chord, A flat to a G7 to C7 to F7. Those are the first few chords of that. So the first chord is B flat major 7. So what you want to do, so what you want to do is go through all the chords starting on the root position. So 1, 3, 5, 7. So that's, in that case, B flat. It's B flat, D, F, A. Next chord is E flat dominant 7. So you're going to go E flat, and I'm starting on the 6th fret here. E flat, G, B flat, D flat. Okay. Then A flat, you can go down here, which is starting on the A flat. Same thing, 1, 3, 5, flat 7 for a dominant chord. And then to the G, 1, 3, 5, flat 7. Starting in root position for all those chord changes. Then once you get comfortable with that, maybe you change the octave of that. Still going 1, 3, 5, 7. That's the B flat, but an octave higher than what I played before. Here's the E flat, an octave higher above that. A flat, G, C, F would be an octave higher than from probably what I played before, and so forth. So then the next step, after you've gone through a couple octaves of starting 1, 3, 5, 7, or 1, 3, 5, flat 7. If it's minor, it's 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. Then you want to start on, let's say, starting on the 3rd of the chord. So going 3, 5, 7, root 3. You still want to go to the whole octave, because the chord is a 4-note chord. What's going to be helpful with this is that also relates to the 8th notes and the way the chords change. So for instance, in that song, B flat major 7 is played for a whole measure. So you can go up to the octave and then back down again, something like this. And the count would be something like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then you would go to the next chord, which is E flat 7, starting on the third of that, which is G. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and again. And now we're on an A flat, so we're starting on the C of that chord, which would be here: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So we started from the third going up, and then obviously we go through the whole cycle of this tune on the starting in the third. Then we want to go to the fifth, and then we go to the seventh. And it's important to do that, because what I found with myself is that I've practiced arpeggios always starting on the root, and then when I'm kind of improvising, that's the sound of my solo ends up sounding that way. I'm always starting on the root of the chord, and it sounds kind of predictable in a way. And it actually sounds pretty cool when you start on different chord tones and work your way up or work your way down. I didn't even really mention you can start in either direction. You can really explore that. But that's something that's very simple that you can remember to work on a regular basis. Is you know there are arpeggios, you go through the inversions and you go through the tune. You don't need to find a book to be able to work through that. So I like kind of practice techniques that allow me to not have to have my nose in a book to kind of figure things out. I want to get to working through the material. Oops, let me go back to this page. Okay, so after you've worked through the arpeggios, you can go through the scales. Now, there's some, I don't know if there's a debate about this, but I see kind of two camps of things where there's this sort of method of working through scales and working through arpeggios and things like that. I do think the scales are important to know, and they provide kind of a good practicing template, and they are good to know. I'm not saying you shouldn't practice scales, but if I had to spend majority of my time, I probably would spend it on arpeggios, because that's the sound of what's actually happening in any moment in a song. If you think about it, you're always playing chords in a song. The chords are moving, and that's the sound. If you're not familiar with those sounds, the scale's not going to do much good for you, because the scale does contain the notes of those chords, but it also contains notes outside of the chord. And if you're not comfortable with those two sides of it, your solo it'll sound like you're hitting wrong notes in a way, even though you're in the correct, quote unquote, correct scale. So to me, one of the first steps is really knowing the chords and the arpeggios. And that's what I'll get into later, talking about Ted Greene. In his single note studies, is like he works a lot on arpeggios. And I like his way of thinking through that. I mean, he does cover scales and things, but the arpeggios is a bulk of what he covers in his books. So it's, again, scales would be kind of I don't want to say an afterthought, but it's kind of lower to me as far as what you want to work through. You'll gain more from learning the tune in a couple of keys, and knowing the arpeggios and the inversions of the arpeggios than you will with any other scales. That'll make you sound like you know what you're doing, more so than just practicing scales. The next thing would be and maybe this actually was probably part of the first step, would be to go through all the chords, really know some chords and different ways of mapping out your chords in that key. You have to maybe get a jazz chord book or something like that. Maybe you'll find books that give you chord patterns to use in jazz, like a 2-5-1 chord progression. I'll put a link in the description, hopefully, of a book that I really like. I think it's what's his name, Omar or something like that. I can't remember quite, but it's a really good book. It's more of a modern approach, has a lot of great concepts as far as chords, and I like his examples that he has in the book, because he gives you some good voice leading ideas as well as some interesting chord shapes to practice. Let's see. Okay, so after the chords and scales and arpeggios and changing the keys, this is definitely an essential part of it, which would be, I almost think this is more important than just working through the scales, which would be kind of learning licks, listening to albums and picking out ideas, licks that you can apply to that particular song you're working on. I would highly recommend just going on iTunes. If you're doing There Is No Greater Love, search that in and download 5 different versions of it and listen to how they play it. See if you can figure out if they're using different chords, what the soloists are playing over those chords. Really kind of dive in deep to what's happening in a particular song. And the good thing is like when you do that enough times, you're going to see some common themes in jazz. And I mean, some that are not so common, but you also see kind of how people are in general are approaching this type of music. But you'll pick out a lot of great ideas through that. Now, it's also good to actually learn a solo from beginning to end. It's something that I need to do more often, which is just transcribe a whole solo and literally play it from beginning to end. It's different than learning bits and pieces of a solo, like licks and things like that. The benefit of learning the solo from beginning to end is you really learn the contour of the whole solo. I mean, there's a reason why they play each phrase, and the whole solo has a kind of a bigger meaning to it, rather than if it's a good solo, it's not just about little licks that they're throwing in. There's a whole shape to that. So if you can do that, even better, but that obviously takes a lot of time. If you're pressed for time, picking out some licks from a solo on that tune that you're working on could be useful. But also understand that lick, know what chord is being played over, know what sound, what tensions and chord tones that they're playing over each one of those chords. Really get a good deep understanding of that, and that'll allow you to use that in more than one context. Now the last one, which is also a really good one to work on, which is actually write out lines in the tune, especially if you're working on improvisation. It could be even chords too, for that matter. Write out a sequence of chords, or write out a solo for a standard tune like There Is No Greater Love. It'll help you kind of see how to connect the chords when you're improvising. And that's, to me, one of the hardest things about playing jazz, is to creating a smooth line through all these difficult chords that are being played. And it's easy to play a lick or an idea on one chord, but what about multiple chords? Can you continue an idea through that? Maybe you build a motif off one chord and you want to keep the motif going through the next chord. Can you do that? And sometimes writing that out can actually be help you kind of figure out your roadmap for that. So that's kind of a really basic general kind of way I think about playing or working on jazz. But that, having said that, it's relatively you don't need a lot of books to do just that. You just need your computer or something to play some music and a recorder, and you're good to go, as long as you understand the concepts that I talked about. Now, if you're still kind of getting up to speed with that, yeah, you'll probably need some theory books and maybe some private instructions to get to that point. Now, let me talk about some of the questions that my good friend Daryl brought up, and hopefully this will I don't know, maybe either spark some ideas and some investigation into these areas, and maybe answer a few kind of mysteries for you. The first thing that I mentioned before is triad pairs. Triad pairs is basically taking a triad, and I'm going to use the key of C as an example. We have, there's a lot of triads in there, but the two triads that I'm going to be talking about is F and G, which is the 4 chord and the 5 chord. And his kind of question is like, how do I approach practicing those two triads? Should I stay in position? Should I move up? That kind of thing. And the short answer is you want to really know it in many different ways, even in many different inversions and things like that. So but I think one maybe good starting point, again, always simplifying as much stuff as you can. Don't try to put too much work on you, or you won't feel like you're accomplishing anything, which would be playing the two triads in one given position. So here we have F triad, here is G triad, and I'm starting the F triad on the 8th fret. So that's, I'll say you the fret numbers I'm playing: 8, 7, 10, and this is 10, 9, 7. And then, so that's just the root position of the triads, 1 3 5 1 3 5 of both of those chords. Now I want to go through 3 5 1. So here's the F chord, 3 5 1. So I'm starting on the 7th fret, which is an A here, to the 10, and that's the 3 5 1. And here's the 3 5 1 of G. Then I'm going to go through the next inversion of the F chord. So I went from 3 5 1. Now I'm going to 5 1 3. And then I'm going to do the same thing on a G chord. And after 5 1 3, you're going back to the root position. So here's the root position F. Here's the root position G. All kind of in this area. And that's kind of keep going up. And the same thing, you can go in reverse order. So if I was going in reverse order, starting on the F chord, I may start on the 5 3 1. And I'll do the 5 3 1, same thing on the G chord. 5 3 1. And then I'm going to go 3 1 5 on the F. And same thing on the G. And then I'm going to go root 5 1 on the F. And then I'm going to go root 5, did I say root 5 3 on the F, root 5 3 on the G, and then where am I at? I'm gonna go 5 3 1 on the F, and then 5 3 1 on the G. And you can extend that even lower and higher, that kind of thing. But kind of start in this position, get comfortable with this. Now you may be asking, well, what can I do? I can practice this triad pair. What good is it? Well, one simple application of it is not even in a jazz context. Let's say you're jamming on just a jam in the key of C, right? And let's say you're just playing a C chord for an extended period of time, just C, that's all you're doing. Well, you can imply different chord movements in your solo, even though everybody else is just staying on a C chord. And what that does is it gives your solo some harmonic movement versus, because if you're always thinking C and you're playing a C chord for 10 minutes, it's going to get kind of old after a while because there's only so much you can do. But if you start to imply some chords kind of on top of that, implying these different chord movements on top of that, your solo starts to create some movement to it. As long as you're resolving correctly back to that, maybe that C chord, you can imply these different chords as you go through, which is kind of a cool sound. And a lot of players do this. And just a simple, maybe a lick would be something like this. I just played some different triads, but I'm still thinking of the key of C, like there's someone's just... And I'll just use fragments of it. I just kind of used a little bit of an F, a little bit of G, that sort of thing. But I'm coming back to C, I'm resolving it, hopefully in a good way. So that's one kind of good example of the triad pairs. Now you could play these triad pairs. Whoops. I'm kind of moving up in that direction of the same two chords, F, G, and I'm going through the same inversions like I would going across here and moving up here. Again, both ways are really good. Start with one. Get comfortable in this region. Maybe you start and work those two chords in this region. Maybe you work them in here. Sometimes playing in position can be kind of more useful. Get comfortable doing, again, one thing first before you start to maybe expand certain things here. See if you can kind of write a lick around it. That's the other thing, is like you can practice all these things, but sometimes they don't come out in your playing. So I would, if you come across something as you're working through an idea like this, kind of remember it. Maybe write it down, or that lick that idea can be yours at that point. And get some. What I sometimes do is I get some backing tracks, whether I create the backing tracks myself or go to YouTube, pull up a backing track that I know that will work over that idea, and practice it. See if I can get it performance ready. And so you really can have a lot of fun with this kind of stuff. And you can play things like, you know, there's a lot of different ways you can play an arpeggio, a triad. You can play one note per string. You can play 2 notes per string, or two strings, I should say. If I play this F, this is on the 8th fret, then I go to the next string down on the 7th and 10. So on the 4th string, I'm playing 2 of those notes. There's a lot of ways, you know, I can play it all on 1 string maybe. So again, start simple. Maybe just start in position, whatever you can fit in that. And then kind of, once you get comfortable with that, you can kind of move on to the other things. What's next? Chromatic. Oh yeah, playing same kind of thing. Triads, but chromatically. And the question was, do I play them chromatically kind of up the neck, or should I play it in a block position? Well, the first question is, I guess, one thought is, why do it in the first place? There's nothing wrong with doing it. You can really learn a lot from playing chromatic major arpeggios up the neck, or even in position. I think the better way to practice something like that would be in position, because you get a better idea of how it's moving in the area of the guitar that's really difficult to see. When you just move it up in this direction, it's just a pattern. Where when you do it in here, it's almost kind of like how a piano player would see these. They have to change the notes, and they have to know what the notes are. So this, you can get kind of complacent because you're just working on a pattern. You're not really thinking about the notes or how that movement's gonna play out. You're just kind of going 1 fret at a time. So playing in one position. You can really, I don't know, you really can start to see things a little bit differently when you do it that way. So I would recommend do it that way, but I would hold off on even doing something like that until you understand what the application is. It's fine if you want to do that to build technique, because it will build some technique in both your picking and also your left hand. But again, I want to keep stressing this, like, practice things that are going to be applicable to performing, to actually playing something. Okay, next is digital patterns. This is the John Coltrane kind of theory. Now, a lot of players use them. Well, John Coltrane, I don't know if I think there's probably players that were playing it before him, but he definitely kind of took it to another level. And what the digital patterns are based off of, they are based off this scale and the chords, and they're kind of a mathematical way of moving through chords, moving through difficult chord changes mathematically. I think that's probably a better statement. And let me just give you an example. If I take, let's say, a C major chord, how about a C major 7? And if I play the first note of that scale, the second note of the scale, the third note of the scale, and the fifth note of the scale, that would be considered a digital pattern. There may be another term for it, but I've definitely heard that term digital pattern used a few times. So that's the 1, 2, 3, 5. Now you can transpose that for every chord in, let's say, that jazz tune that you're playing. So if the jazz tune goes like this, from a C major 7 to, let's say, an A7 to a D minor 7 to a G7, okay? It's pretty standard kind of movement there. So I can apply that, but I will make changes based off the chord. And I'll give you an example. So the C is going to go 1, 2, 3, 5. The A is also going to go 1, 2, 3, 5, because it's a dominant chord. It's a major triad in there with the flat 7. So the 1, 2, 3, 5 digital pattern doesn't have the 7, so I don't need to make any compensation for that A7. But then I do when I get to the D minor, because that has a flat 3. I'll still use the same digital pattern, 1, 2, but I'm going to play flat 3 and then 5. So it sounds like that. And then I'm going to do for G7, I'm going to go back to the 1, 2, 3, 5. Again, the 1 is always starting on whatever the root of that chord is. So let me go back to the C. So again, starting on C for the C major 7 chord. 1, 2, 3, 5. A7, 1, 2, 3, 5. D minor, 1, 2, flat 3, 5. Pardon my voice, singing. G7, 1, 2, 3, 5. So it's a very simple way of kind of moving. Well, I shouldn't say simple. It's a difficult. It takes some of the guesswork out of. It takes some of the creativity out of, I guess, improvising. Well, I hate to even use that because Coltrane was a creative genius, in my opinion, and he used these a lot. It's a method. It's a certain sound, and it works well because our ear likes to hear these kinds of patterns. As long as you're making the correction for them and you're finding use for them, they can be useful. But if you don't know your arpeggios and your inversions, it may be something you want to kind of hold off and put off to a later time. They can sometimes be useful in some of, like, when you are dealing with some of the harmony that Coltrane was playing, because he played some difficult. He would write some difficult chord changes, and these digital patterns can give you kind of a way of navigating through that. And there's a lot of different ones. I gave you 1, 2, 3, 5. There's ones like 3, 5, 2, 1, 5, 5, 3, 2, 1. There's a lot of different variations. You can come up with your own. And there's some more usage. That could be a whole lesson in itself. But just kind of wanted to give you some background on what you can, a little bit about that sort of concept. Next up is pentatonics. One of the questions was, there's all these different types of pentatonics out there. If you do a Google search for all the pentatonics, you're going to come up with all kinds of stuff. Major pentatonics, minor pentatonics, flat 6 pentatonics. A bunch of different ones. Now, if you already know pentatonics, a few of them already really well, then yeah, you can start to investigate some of these more obscure pentatonics. But there's a lot of use for just the minor pentatonic and how you apply that in different ways. And let me give you an example. Let's take the D minor 7 chord. I could play a D minor pentatonic for that. That scale works really well. It sounds like this. Now there's another minor pentatonic that works also well over this chord, which would be A minor. Most guitar players know that one really well. And the reason why that one works well is because it has some of those chord tones of the D minor in it, but it also gives us a couple other colors. So let's just analyze that for a second. If I start on A and relate that to D minor 7, that A is the 5th of D minor. The next note of the A minor pentatonic is C, and that's the flat 7 of this D minor 7 chord. The next note of that A minor pentatonic is D, which would be the root of that D minor 7 chord. Next note is E, which would be the second note of that D minor 7, or the 9th of that D minor 7. The next note is G, which would be the 4th or the 11th of D minor 7. And then we're back to A, and it's just going to repeat. So we get a few different interesting colors. We get the 9th, and then we get the 11th by playing an A minor pentatonic over a D minor chord. So that's kind of a way to approach pentatonics, is taking that simple minor pentatonic that we all kind of know and applying it in a different way like this. Another useful thing, and this is what he brought in, or what he suggested, was the D minor chord with the A minor pentatonic that I just talked about. Then the next chord in, let's say, a simple jazz progression would be G7, like I mentioned before. So what minor pentatonic can you play there? Well, he mentions B flat minor pentatonic, and that is a good minor pentatonic to play over G7. It seems kind of weird, like B flat. Why can we play B flat over G7? Well, if you analyze it, we get some altered tones. And the thing with a dominant chord loves like tension. So the more altered stuff you can throw on a dominant chord, the better. Unless you're like in a traditional blues setting, you just kind of, you want to keep it kind of to that style. But in jazz, you can get away with playing a lot of tension on a dominant chord, as long as it's used in the right spots. But most of the time, it's okay. And so this B flat minor pentatonic scale gives us some pretty cool tension. So if we analyze it, the first note of a B flat minor pentatonic against the G7 chord, that first note is B flat. That's our sharp 9. Next note is a D flat, which is our flat 5, or sharp 11, if you know your theory on that. Next note is E flat, which is a flat 13 or a flat 6 against the G7. And the next note is F, which is just the flat 7 of G7. And then we have an A flat, which is the flat 9. So we get some altered tensions on that. It's hard to, since I'm not a piano player, I can't play the two at the same time, but hopefully you get the idea what I'm going with this. So that's, and we all know some sort of minor pentatonic patterns, and now we can create a pretty cool hip modern sound, altered sound over a dominant chord by going up 1, 2, 3 frets from the root of that dominant chord. Here's our G, here's our B flat. Now the next chord is C major 7. So what minor pentatonic can we play over that? Well, B is one that works really well. Same thing, you want to analyze what that minor pentatonic colors give us. We get the major 7th, which is B, over the C. Again, we're thinking of a C major 7 chord. So we have B. The next note is D, which is the 9th. The next note is E, which is the 3rd of C major 7. The next note is F sharp, which is the flat 5 or the sharp 11 on a C major 7th chord. The next note is A, which is going to give us the 6 of a C major 7 chord, and then we're back to B, which is the major 7th. So same thing, we can get some pretty cool colors using that B minor pentatonic over a C major 7 chord. Now the next chord in the sequence is really common, is to go to an A7, and if I slide that minor pentatonic now up to C, so I'm playing C minor pentatonic, that will give me the same kind of tension that we saw over the G, but now over A, because it's the same distance. Over G, we used a B minor pentatonic, which is 1, 2, 3 frets away. A, we're doing the same thing. We're going 3 frets away and playing the minor pentatonic right here over an A root or A7 chord. So we're going to get the same kind of tension on that. So over that progression of D minor 7, G7, C major 7, A7, you can play minor pentatonics moving up 1 fret at a time starting on A. Pretty cool. So it does give you, again, that pentatonic kind of flavor to it. So here's a couple other usage of pentatonics. So we already mentioned, so on the D minor, we mentioned we can play an A minor pentatonic. We can also play an E minor pentatonic. There's probably others out there, but I'm just going to give you a few that you can kind of work with. Next chord was G7. We mentioned we can play a B flat minor pentatonic. You can also play an F minor pentatonic, works well. C major 7, we mentioned B minor pentatonic. You can also play an E minor pentatonic over that, works well. And here's another chord that we didn't cover in that sequence, which is C minor 7 flat 5. And that is, you can use an E flat minor pentatonic or an F minor pentatonic over that chord. Next up, let's get into some voice leading, what is that, and how we should approach that, I should say. Voice leading, it's basically moving between chords, and this is, I'm generalizing this description, which would be moving between chords in a very smooth fashion. And we want to move as little as possible to get to the next chord. And again, this is oversimplifying what voice leading is, because there's a lot of ways you can approach this. But I think the problem with the guitar and guitarists in general is that we don't really think about voice leading that much. The better guitar players do. But most of us kind of just learn a few shapes, and we just kind of clunk through the progression using the shapes that we know. And we don't really think about that connection between the chords. So let me just give you a simple example. Here is a D minor 7 chord. Oops. So I'll give you the frets. I'm going 7, and I'm starting on the 4th string. So I'm going 7, 7, 6, 8. It's a drop 2 voicing. Now, the next chord in the progression that we've been working with, which is D minor to G7, I want to take this shape, this voicing of this D minor 7, and go to a G7 chord without moving as little as possible. And this would be kind of, I guess, considered good voice leading. So one G7 chord, I know I can go to this shape here. So from this versus going from this chord, let's say you know this chord, and then going, that's not really good voice leading. Now, I'm not saying you can't do that. Obviously, you can do whatever you want as long as you understand what you're doing. But a lot of times we want the voices, the chords, to move smoothly like this. So again, so we have this D minor, and I'm just moving a few notes to it. A couple of them stayed the same. For instance, this D stayed the same, and this F stayed the same. I move this note down from the 7th to the 5th fret, and I move this top note down 1 note. And the next chord is C major 7. I just moved these 2 fingers here. I lifted up, and I got to my C major 7. So that is kind of a real basic way of voice leading. And soloing, I guess you can think of it in the same way. You want to sometimes play. That's where I think of good when you're improvising and you smoothly transition between those chords as you're improvising. To me, that's kind of good voice leading in a improvised solo standpoint, I should say. And that's always hard. That's always something I always struggle with, to be able to play an idea and carry that through the chords. That's where I mentioned before, writing things out can be really helpful. Okay. Now I just want to cover a few other little basic things. The Ted Greene book that I mentioned before, one of the questions was, he covers a lot of major chords. Does he cover the other chords in the book? Absolutely. He covers major 7th chords, dominant 7th chords, minor 7th chords, and I think he even covers minor 7 flat 5 chords. In the second book, he covers melodic minor and harmonic minor scales and some of the harmony that's related to that. And another question was arpeggio versus scale runs. A lot of what Ted Greene does is arpeggio based. There is some scale type stuff in there, but like I said, he really targets the arpeggios a lot in the sound of the chords. Whether you're playing let's say a C major 7 or a C major 7 with a 9, he's really targeting that sound. And I like that approach because, again, that's what we're essentially hearing, okay? Or being played, I should say. So the other question is, what arpeggios should I be working on? Well, in a jazz context, I think there's let's see, there's about 4 or 5 that you want to just know cold. The major 7th chord, the minor 7th chord, the dominant 7th chord, and the, let's say, minor 7 flat 5 chord. Those 4 types of chords happen all the time in jazz. Now I know there's like some diminished chords, and that would probably be maybe the 5th chord that you can kind of work on. You definitely see some diminished chords in jazz, so I would probably include that one. But getting those first 4 down cold first would be you would get really far in studying jazz. And like I said in the beginning, learn those in different inversions: 1 3 5 7, 3 5 7 3, that kind of thing. Know the different patterns of that. Tritone substitution. The question was, can I use that for, is it just used for both playing the chords, or is it used for soloing? And the answer is, yeah, you can do it for both. It's I hear it on both ends of things. Soloist playing the tritone sub, and the chordal player, the rhythm player, playing the tritone subs as well. If you don't know what a tritone substitution is, it's basically playing a dominant chord a tritone away from whatever chord is written in the music. So an example, if you're playing a C7 chord, if you go up a tritone from that, it would be a G flat 7. And usually when we're playing a C7 chord, the next chord is going to be an F chord, either a major 7th or possibly an F dominant chord, F7. So what's kind of cool about these tritone subs, if you think about it, if you go to a G flat 7 and then you go to an F7, it's just 1 fret down. So you get this sequence sometimes of just going. So one's the real chord, one's the tritone sub, one's the real chord, one's the tritone sub. It kind of goes back and forth between those. So you can play that in your chords, and you can also play that in your soloing. The reason why the tritone subs work is because the tritone shares the same 3rd and flat 7 as the original chord. An example would be, again, C7. The 3rd of C7 is C. The flat 7 of C7 is B flat. Those 2 notes are found in the G flat 7 chord. The B flat is the 3rd of the G flat 7 chord. This E is the flat 7 of the G flat 7 chord. So they kind of swap, but they're the meat of the chord. That's why they work so well. The only thing that really changes is the root and the 5th. A lot of times we leave out the 5th in playing the chord. Next up is playing scales, 3 notes per string versus playing in a block. And the question is, which one should I work on? Unfortunately, it's good to know both. But if you're comfortable playing 3 notes a string, that would be the way to go. Well, I shouldn't say the way to go. It's stick with that. You're working with that. Get comfortable with that. Once you've kind of feel like you've mastered that, you're getting comfortable with it, then you can work in block position. I learned the opposite. I kind of learned positions, these block positions of scales, before I learned. That was a 3-note pattern. It doesn't make much difference which one you learn first. The imposition or the block ones seemed a little bit easier for me than the 3-note ones. The advantage of the 3-note ones is you can start to slur in triplets because there's 3 notes. So if you can, kind of learn them both, but don't let that dominate, don't let that take over your practice of arpeggios and learning tunes. Same thing with melodic minor. The same rules would apply with that. If you're comfortable with 3 notes per string, that's fine. There's advantage to that, and there's advantages playing in position. I think it's important to be able to know and see the scale, regardless if you're playing 3 notes or in position. An example: if I take the, let's keep in the key of C. I'm just trying to randomly kind of go around that C major scale. I'm not trying to think of whether it's 3 notes in position or whatever. I'm just seeing if I can see all those notes, because if I'm improvising, I want to have a lot of freedom of where I can go. I may do a little run of a 3 note per string pattern or inbox, quick little flurries of things like that, but I also want to be able to see everything. So over time, you really want to just kind of, you want to, again, kind of freedom to kind of go anywhere and create these melodic ideas out of that. All right, we're getting towards the end of this. Woo! It's been a long one. The last one would be, or almost the last one, which would be, sometimes we get these chords that can be applied, or I should say these chord shapes that can be used for 2 different chords or many chords. And here's an example. This will probably help. If I play a B flat 6 chord, I'm playing this chord here, B flat 6th fret 6th string, 5th fret 4th string, 7th fret 3rd string, and then the 6th fret 2nd string. That's a B flat 6 chord. It's a good version of that. Now, if you analyze these notes, they're the same exact notes in a G minor 7th chord. So the question is, can I use this shape when it says G minor 7? Or maybe do I, actually the question is, if it's written in the music B flat 6 to a G minor 7, do I even need to change chords? And the answer is you really don't, okay? You could keep the same chord shape because it's essentially the same sound. The difference between the two really lies within the bass. What is the bass doing? If the bass goes B flat, does it go to G minor? Then it's changing that sound. So if you're playing with a bass player, you essentially could stay on that same chord. It may be good to just change the voicing of that to create some movement in it, but it's essentially the same chord. And you'll find that in a lot of different contexts. Same thing when you're soloing. An example would be, I can play a B flat major 7 lick over a G minor chord. I'm not going to get into the details of why that works, but they're essentially the same kind of sound in a way. The difference is when I have a different root, that those notes will take on a slightly different color to it, but they're very similar chords. There's a lot of notes that cross over in the chord. So it's good to kind of know a few of those. So as you study more music theory, you'll be able to kind of see these kind of similar sounds and similar notes between chords. And this is just one of them. What I would do in a situation where if the chord says B flat 6 to a G minor 7, again, I would probably change those chord shape. Here's a B flat, another B flat 6 chord to a G minor 7th chord. Whoops. So I would kind of go through some different chord versions for that. So the last question, and this is kind of what I started off in this whole kind of rant, or if you want to call it a rant, not really a rant. It's all information with this stuff. But the question was, the difference, or his kind of thought of learning new material versus building upon what you know. And it's tough. And to be honest with you, I don't know what the ratio should be of that. But something that hopefully has kind of been an ongoing theme in this whole tutorial, which is simplify things as much as possible. I covered a lot of concepts, but most of them it may be years before you even work on them. Myself, there's a lot of these that I really don't have down all that well. I like the way they sound, but I'm just still trying to get together playing through a tune on a very basic level. So kind of pick your battles. Like I think what I said in the beginning, I think is a good approach. Learn the tunes, learn the arpeggios, record yourself, work on rhythm and things like that. And let's see. Anything else? I think that's it. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. I'll try to make some more video tutorials that dive a little bit more detail in this stuff, and we can explore it. So definitely send me some questions and some thoughts on this, and we all can work on this and get better at learning jazz and just music in general. So hopefully you found this helpful, and I'll see you, all you guys, and I'm jealous. Send pictures. I'll see you in September. Ciao.